It's Tuesday, it's 1:45, and we're live from the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, where in around 15 minutes' time, Sir Keir Starmer will deliver his first speech to conference as Prime Minister. A short time ago, you can see here Keir Starmer arrived with his wife Victoria at the conference centre, ahead, of course, of addressing the party faithful. They'll be hoping to draw a line under the row over clothes and glasses paid for by a wealthy Labour donor. The Prime Minister here, as you can see in these pictures, as is tradition, putting the finishing touches to his speech that he is about to give to conference as Prime Minister for the first time here in Liverpool. And he'll be hoping to inject a little more optimism and light at the end of the tunnel. We're told he's going to speak for around 45 minutes to an hour. As always, timings can slip a little, but we're hoping he will stick vaguely to that envelope. And of course, we have guests with us before the speech and after. Joining me now, Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson, Isabel Hardman of The Spectator, Sienna Rogers of The House magazine, and our political editor, Chris Mason. This is Politics Live. Welcome to everyone here, and of course delegates will be waiting to go inside the conference hall to take their places, but I'm pleased to say we have quite a few of them here around the set, wanting to hear what our guests have to say. So let's start with my colleague Chris Mason. How much of this is going to be a reset moment, do you think, for Sir Keir Starmer?
Well, I think first of all, I'm conscious that journalistically, the nature of journalism often is to look for the kind of grit and the spike and the difficulties that any political party or government might face, and they all do. It would be churlish not to acknowledge the moment that you were just reflecting on in your opening of what a moment this is for Keir Starmer personally and for the Labour movement more broadly, that after a heck of a long time, this is a Labour Party conference when they're in government, and we're about to hear not just from the Labour leader, but from the Prime Minister. And, that sense of in and around conference, understandably from the perspective of activists here, a sort of sense of celebration, whilst at the same time it strikes me, if I compare the mood here this year from the last couple of years, particularly last year that sense of buzzing excitement and effervescent kind of anticipation of a possible victory, whereas now, and again on a human level, I think it's worth acknowledging that this is perhaps inevitable, the weight on the shoulders of ministers, because they've got a country to run, and the burdens of office and the trade-offs that are involved with that, as well as some of the perhaps missteps that have been in the first few months, and those kind of growing pains of adjusting to government.
Right, and actually we've already had one programme looking at what's going on here, and before I bring in our other guests, Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, was very keen when addressing some of the divisions, particularly within number 10 at the very top, gave a passionate defence of Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, against whom there have been briefings, including the story that you broke very recently about her being paid more than the Prime Minister. And he said if they're going to make any changes, they must keep Sue Gray.
Yeah, and I suppose there's to look at that very sort of narrowly, and there's obviously loads more that we can talk about in the context of a conference speech. I suppose the centre has a challenge, doesn't he? The Prime Minister has a challenge in that particular situation. Do you remove someone like that or encourage them to go off and do something else? Do you think that they offer a hugely valuable service to the government? And by the way, plenty in government think she absolutely does, and protect and defend her, and perhaps get rid of those who don't like her? Or do you try and resolve the row that is causing some people to talk to people like me in the way that they have been doing? And it seems to me that remains a sort of unresolved kind of question as things stand, and I think is also symptomatic of something a little bit wider, which is a new Prime Minister coming in, not just working out which levers to pull from the centre, but where are the levers in terms of making the machinery of government work. And again, supporters of Sue Gray say that's a real skill that she can bring, given her longevity in and around government. And but then other personnel sort of movements and shifts within Downing Street that are in the works as well. I mean, not least the appointment of a new Cabinet Secretary, the most senior civil servant, that's going to be underway in the next couple of months, with Simon Case standing down in a few months' time.
Well, let's talk to one member of the cabinet, Bridget Phillipson. How does it feel? How does it feel this year? There was more of a sense of almost anticipation last year. Now you're in government.
Well, I think last year there was also a sense of nervousness because we knew how close the election was. We knew that we had the chance to win that election. So whilst it was exciting, there was also that element of nervousness. The difference here this year is that, because of the work of so many of the people that are here, for the first time since 2009, we have a conference as a party of government, and that does bring with it big responsibilities. And I think what you'll see today from Keir is Keir setting out as Prime Minister, addressing conference for the first time as Prime Minister, the change that we are already delivering for the British people.
Do you think it has been a rather short, if non-existent, political honeymoon for you all? Perhaps you were thinking you were going to enjoy a little bit more sort of sympathy and celebration with the public and your own party faithful.
We faced some big challenges in the early days of government, not least, of course, we had the serious disorder and riots over the summer, so there have been some big issues to confront, some tough decisions that we've needed to take. But I'd have that any day of the week over being in opposition, where we get to talk, where we were only able to talk about the change we wanted to deliver. Whereas today, what you'll hear from Keir is what we are doing to bring to life the promises that we made in that election. And whether it's GB Energy, rail, education, my area, lots that we've already done in a very short space of time.
Isabel, the Prime Minister will tell the country that the short-term pain of the tough decisions means a long-term gain, from higher living standards to lower waiting lists, and it will come much quicker for the country. Have they felt, they've obviously heard this sort of narrative that perhaps there's been just too much doom and gloom?
Yeah, and I think we are going to get a more optimistic tone from the Prime Minister. A bit like Rachel Reeves yesterday was doing a lot of smiling to sort of show that she's still very happy despite being gloomy.
Bridget Phillipson smiling too.
Yeah, she's smiling too.
Yeah, so there'll be more of that.
Yeah, but I mean, I think one of the problems with this conference, it's not just that, it's a difficult economic situation, you've got lots of public services that are, on their knees. I think also just in terms of the sort of strategy for this conference, they haven't really said anything. I mean, I'm obviously waiting for Bridget's speech as well, but there's, there's no focal point, there's no policy aside from the winter fuel payment that everyone's talking about that has appeared at this conference to move things on. That's why we're still talking about Sue Gray, and we're still talking about an announcement that was made in the summer.
Right. I mean, I know, Chris, you have to go in just a moment, and I will come to you, Sienna, I promise. You're with us for the whole programme around the speech. Of course, we're here in Liverpool, the annual tradition of a party conference, but then Keir Starmer is off. The Prime Minister, of course, back on the world stage.
Yes, so he is heading tonight to New York to the UN General Assembly. So he'll give his speech this afternoon. He'll do a few interviews and that kind of thing immediately afterwards, some of which we'll see tomorrow morning on BBC Breakfast and the Today programme and other outlets. And then, he's back on the international stage. Second trip across the Atlantic in under a fortnight, because he was out there seeing President Biden just a couple of weeks ago. Clearly the situation in the Middle East has been developing whilst this conference has been ongoing. There's that wider question about Ukraine, and President Zelensky will be there with his peace plan as he sees it, and the extent to which international allies sort of buy into that, and that question around missiles, which has been sort of hovering as to whether or not there is that sign-off for the deployment of Western missiles into Russia. So straight back onto that international stage with two very live conflicts going on for a new government to also get to grips with all sorts of profound geopolitical potential consequences.
Right, well, we'll let you go and take your place inside the conference hall for the speech, and to come back to some of the issues I was talking about at the very beginning, and that's some of the negative briefing, some of the damage that perhaps has been done. Why do you think that has been more potent, if you like, than certainly the government would like them to be, bearing in mind they've just won a landslide?
Yes, and it feels like this conference should be kind of a victory lap. It should be a celebration. And whenever I speak to cabinet ministers, the ones I've interviewed, they are so excited. They keep going, oh, I've got my red box. I can actually do things. This is so exciting. And yet the conference itself feels quite flat. And I do think it's the kind of thing that Isabel was talking about, of there just being no coherent theme. There hasn't been something running through every speech that journalists can latch onto and move on from those negative briefings by just give us something really chunky so that we can explore it and discuss it and interview people about it. That's what journalists want.
Right. I mean, do you think there should be something more chunky? Can you give us something more to get our teeth into?
We've given you an awful lot. I mean, we're getting on and delivering on quite a big and ambitious manifesto in terms of the change that our country needs. I think part of the challenge is we only just had the election in July. Actually, we've made remarkable progress in such a short space of time. I mean, take education alone. We've reformed Ofsted, ended those one-word judgments in schools, started a curriculum review, set up Skills England to make sure we've got more apprenticeships for our young people. We're not short of areas where we're really delivering on what we said, but it is more focused on how we demonstrate we're making the change happen that people voted for, rather than new things, because we've got, frankly, quite a big list and certainly a pretty bleak inheritance as well from the Conservatives.
Jonathan Ashworth has just joined us from Labour Together. Welcome to you.
Hello.
Have you been enjoying yourself?
Yes.
That was very definite, let's put it that way.
Of course I'm enjoying myself. I have been coming to this conference for 13, 14 years under a Tory government. I tell you, coming to this conference under a Labour government is absolutely fantastic.
But what
So
do you think
yes,
about
I am
Sienna?
enjoying
But
myself.
what do you
Not
think about Sienna
triumphant.
saying it's a bit flat?
No, it's not. I mean, this is it flat. Eh?
Well, I mean, I think there is a feeling that any celebration about an incoming Labour government after 40 years has been sort of countered by all the briefings going on at the top against the Chief of Staff, all of the stories about donations and freebies, winter fuel payment cuts. That's been the narrative. Why?
No, it hasn't. No, it hasn't. I mean, look, it's obviously been a challenging few days with some of those stories that you've referenced there. And look, no strategist, no conference organiser would have wanted that to be the backdrop. But I think actually, let's focus on the substance that is coming from our Secretary of State's speeches. Yesterday, Rachel was talking about an industrial strategy. She's talking about fixing the problems in the economy. You're going to hear Keir today talking about important welfare reforms to help people get back to work. And I think you are actually going to see, yes, an honesty with the public about the tough decisions ahead on the journey that we're embarking upon. But I think you'll also begin to see him unveiling, daring to glimpse at that brighter and better day ahead. And look, it has stopped raining as well here. It is already brightening up here as well.
Well, that is a huge relief to us all who've been making that.
Soaking wet here. I mean, that's maybe why people might feel a bit flat, because every time I've turned up here, I've looked like a drowned rat. The weather's been so bad.
Well, from the dryness of the set here inside the conference centre, we can take a peek inside the conference. We can see a video running there. It's usually traditional to have a warm-up, if you like, before Sir Keir Starmer, in this case, Labour Prime Minister, takes to his feet at the stage. And of course there was that snap election campaign in July. Everybody hands to the deck to actually present themselves as a government in waiting, and you can see there, change begins. That is the slogan. And Jonathan Ashworth is promising that there'll be more flesh on the bones in terms of how this government is going to deliver on some of the promises they've got. But let me say goodbye and thank you to Bridget Phillipson for the moment, and she can go and enjoy the speech. But what about reminding everybody about how this Labour government got here?
The leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer.
A plan that will turn the page, deliver stability and change.
They just want me excluded from Parliament.
It's the same old Tory policy.
We gave up on being a party of protest 5 years ago. We will not raise income tax. We will not raise national insurance. We will not raise VAT. That is a manifesto commitment. It's a manifesto full of hope and change.
And as Big Ben strikes 10, the exit poll is predicting a Labour landslide.
We did it! forward, now our country has voted decisively for change.
So we're waiting for the Prime Minister to speak in a few minutes' time. You can see actually inside the hall again, they're showing those 5 missions that Keir Starmer has outlined and no doubt will be repeated again and again as the government tries to move on to delivering on policy. Jonathan Ashworth, perhaps one of the issues has been that the sort of staging of the big events. There isn't a budget until the end of October. We now know there's going to be an industrial strategy. And in between, the sort of focus, certainly from the media, has been on other things while we wait to find out exactly what Rachel Reeves is going to say about these painful, tough decisions that she's talked about.
Yeah, and look, in all seriousness, I mean, party conferences are a key part of the political calendar.
Yeah.
It's important that the biggest names in the cabinet, Rachel Reeves, obviously Keir Starmer, Angela, Bridget, use this week as an opportunity to get their message across. But let's be honest, the most important political event coming up will be the budget. And that will really set the course for the remainder of this Parliament for the next 4 to 5 years.
What about the result of that election? A big landslide, but on 35% share of the vote. Is it still a case that the public and voters haven't embraced Labour? They've certainly turned away from the Conservatives. I mean, most definitely. But they haven't yet quite embraced the Prime Minister, whom we're about to hear from.
I think that's obvious. I mean, I don't think it's unfair to say that it was a loveless landslide, and I think people are aware of that in the Labour Party. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say, really. I think it's true, and so many MPs, so many of those new MPs in particular, are really feeling those upcoming electoral threats. They're looking to the next election already because they have the Greens, they have Reform breathing down their necks, and they're feeling that very, very keenly. So a lot of them, especially backbenchers, are a bit frustrated by the kind of negativity and the sort of doom and gloom because they're worrying about their seats for the next election.
Isabel?
Yeah, I mean, part of the negativity is with a view to the next election in terms of making the Tories seem unelectable for, I guess, a generation, in the same way as the Tories did to Labour back in 2010, where they, ran around with Liam Byrne's note and basically, I think, decided the 2015 election in the very early days of the coalition. But it is difficult, and it does also, some of these rows do play into the hands of the Greens on one side, Reform on the other, where you've got anti-politics parties who are really feasting on the sort of dysfunction in number 10.
The Independents as well, of course, who did remarkably well that election, as Jonathan knows very well.
Right, I mean, and you're a great electoral strategist. You know how these things work. Where should the focus be by the government?
Well, look, we at Labour Together, which is the think tank I now run, produced a report on Friday, really crunching the numbers on why Labour won. And what it showed is that huge numbers of Tory voters switched to Labour, and that was really what gave rocket fuel to our victory. And for Labour to get re-elected, they've got to hold on to those Tory voters who, interestingly, put cost of living in the economy and the NHS as their top issues for voting Labour.
Well, let's get a flavour of what people here are thinking, because my colleague Harry Farley has talked to a few of them as they've gone into the hall.
I'm hoping to hear that he's going to give us a better Britain, a real change, that we are looking to bring up the ground people who have struggled over the Conservative parties over the recent years, a better thing for our children, free school meals, breakfast clubs, and a far better NHS, which has struggled over the last, since 2010. We're not been meeting our NHS targets, and we have really poor social care. So I'm hoping that the agenda and the next 10-year vision that he's going to put forward will deliver all of that for us.
Do you think you've heard enough of that vision, particularly on things like the NHS and social care so far?
Probably not as much about social care as I would like. I think that's something that is sadly lacking. The quality of social care provision is poor in this country now, and we need a completely different model of social care.
What about you, madam? What would you like to hear from the Prime Minister today?
Yeah, just like my colleague said, I would want a reiteration of a better Britain. We've heard so much about how the Tories were in power for 14 years and the disappointment suffered by nearly everyone. Now the Labour is in power. I would like to believe that the Prime Minister already has everything in check. I would like to believe he's ready for the job. I cannot, I mean, I'm a Labour member. I think I already believe he has everything set to do the right job, to do the right thing. So his speech today is just to reiterate on what he has already started doing, just to reinforce on the obvious. Just like she said, I would like to see free school meals because we know the struggles, parenting struggles. I would like to see reduced childcare costs. These are what people are clamoring for.
Well, it's building up inside the hall, and we can see here 21-year-old Matthew, who is introducing the Prime Minister, a first-time Labour voter, and he's going to talk for a few minutes, and then there will be the classic minute-and-a-half video to remind everybody once again about that election victory and some of the missions that Labour is committed to actually delivering on in government. Expectations are high, and everybody looks at the Prime Minister's speech, don't they, Isabel, and expect politics to be transformed.
Are expectations high, though? I'm not sure. I think, we've been talking about the downbeat nature of this conference. I don't think anyone's expecting him to sort of move the dial in this speech. I think there was an expectation going into this whole event that the party might be able to move on from a difficult few weeks, but I'm not sure. I mean, maybe Jonathan and Sienna have a different view, but I'm not sure people are thinking, this is the moment when it all changes for Labour this autumn.
No, I don't think people are, but I think it would be good if he could do that. I mean, there does need to be that reset moment, and
and the delegates there want it,
don't
they?
Really want it. People are kind of, it's a conference that feels very different to the last several years. It's full of lobbyists. It feels quite corporate. It doesn't feel sort of member-powered in the way that people are so excited for that general election coming up to it. And now it's kind of people want something from Keir Starmer, something they can hold on to.
Well, look, I think you'll see him sketching out the journey ahead. I think it will be a moment for the Labour family to come together and celebrate that victory.
Because it has been divided, certainly at the top of government, hasn't it, Jonathan Ashworth? It has. Come on, we've had endless briefings. We had Andy Burnham sitting where you were, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, saying, my advice is, yes, sort of get a grip of the top of government or at the top of Downing Street. But the one thing you mustn't do is get rid of Sue Gray, the Chief of Staff.
This is all, honestly, this is all froth. I used to come to these... Yeah, of course it is. I used to come to these conferences with you when the person I worked for, Gordon Brown, was sometimes falling out, so you journalists said, with the...
You're admitting it now.
With his next-door neighbour, Tony Blair. This is just peripheral stuff. A few advisors moaning here and there.
This is nothing compared to new Labour division, basically.
Isabel?
But, they started falling out on a much lower level and then it escalated. And actually, we are seeing the policy impacts of these divisions. You get people within government saying this has disappeared into the hole that's being created by the power issues within Downing Street. Decisions aren't being taken. And so, look, journalists love reporting gossip. We do. But often it is gossip with a means to explaining why something isn't happening. And I do think that it is more than froth and that it could develop into, I don't know, what's a sort of worse version of froth? I don't want to say scum, but something bad.
All right, well, we'll just leave that word there. But do you agree, just broadly, that it points to something wider?
Well, this is the concern, isn't it? Is that it's not teething issues. It's actually indicative of something a little bit deeper where maybe there's a lack of political nous at the top and that there are these divisions between people who've been working together for some time.
Well, here is the man of the moment, Sir Keir Starmer, out onto the stage, ready to address conference. The party faithful, obviously getting rapturous applause. We'll see a lot of that, no doubt, throughout his speech. But let's just go inside and await for the Prime Minister to start talking.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, conference. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Matthew, for that introduction. That was really fantastic. You've broken through to university, but you stood on this stage, aged 21, to do something you've never done before, and not an easy thing to do. That was fantastic. And thank you, conference. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you, Conference, for everything you have done to fulfil the basic duty of our party, our Clause 1, so we can return this great nation to the service of working people. Thank you, Conference. People said we couldn't do it, but we did, and we did it together. And look at this now, a record-breaking conference, the biggest attendance ever in our history. And such a far cry from my first conference speech to a live audience of one. The cameraman, socially distanced in an arts centre in Doncaster. Remember that? Don't worry, most people don't. Not even the cameraman. But I bet you do remember the one the year later conference in Brighton, 3 years ago. The turning of the tide, the fight for the heart and soul of this party. People said we were going too far. People said we were going too fast. They didn't want to face the country. They wanted to go back to a comfort zone, take the easier road to nowhere, duck the challenge of change. But we stood firm, Conference. We stood together, Conference, and we won. So take pride in your victory. Take pride that Labour won in every single region in England. Take pride that Labour won in Wales. Take pride that Labour won in Scotland. But never forget that this opportunity is only here because we changed the party. Country first, party second, that isn't a slogan. It's the foundation of this project, a pact with working people we must fulfill to retain the privilege of serving their interests on economic stability, national security, wealth creation, protecting our borders, rooting out anti-Semitism, standing with NATO and Ukraine. The changes we made are permanent, irreversible. And the work of service never stops. Country first, party second. But Conference, for many people in this city, the speech they may remember was the one here 2 years ago, because that's when I promised, on this stage, that if I ever had the privilege to serve our country as Prime Minister, one of my first acts would be to bring in a Hillsborough law, a duty of candour. A law for Liverpool, a law for the 97, a law that people shouldn't have had to fight so hard to get, that will be delivered by this Labour government. It's also a law for the sub-postmasters in the Horizon scandal, the victims of infected blood, Windrush, Grenfell Tower, and all the countless injustices over the years suffered by working people at the hands of those who were supposed to serve them. Truth and justice concealed behind the closed ranks of the state. And Conference, this is the meaning of Clause 1. Because today, I can confirm that the duty of candour will apply to public authorities and public servants. The bill will include criminal sanctions, and that the Hillsborough law will be introduced to Parliament before the next anniversary in April. it's work that shows how a government of service must act in everything it does. Our driving purpose, to show to the working people of this country that politics can be a force for good. Politics can be on the side of truth and justice. Politics can secure a better life for your family through the steady but uncompromising work of service. Because service is the responsibility and opportunity of power, the precondition for hope, the bond of respect that can unite a country, bind us to the politics of national renewal. Service doesn't mean we'll get everything right. It doesn't mean everyone will agree. But it does mean we understand that every decision we take together, and that it is our duty to the British people to face up to necessary decisions in their interests. And I mean, conference, you know me by now. So you know all those shouts and bellows, the bad faith advice from people who still hanker for the politics of noisy performance, the weak and cowardly fantasy of populism. It's water off a duck's back. Mere glitter on a shirt cuff. It's never distracted me before, and it won't distract me now. This is a long-term project. I've never pretended otherwise. But conference, make no mistake, the work of change has begun. The patient, calm, determined era of politics as service has begun. Planning reformed, doctors back in theatre, new solar projects, new offshore wind projects, the onshore ban lifted, Great British Energy launched, one-word Ofsted judgments ended, a border security command, a national wealth fund, getting Britain building again, the Renters Reform Bill, stopping no-fault evictions, and the Railway Services Bill, bringing railways back into public ownership. And we're only just getting started. A crackdown on knife crime, a real living wage, a modern industrial strategy, a 10-year plan for our NHS, devolution to our nation's regions and cities, the biggest levelling up of workers' rights in a generation, more teachers, more neighbourhood police, more operations, rebuilding our public services. Change has begun. And every single one a necessary step on a longer journey. 5 national missions that will deliver the higher growth, the safer streets, the cleaner energy, the greater opportunities, the healthier society that I know the British people want and need, the mandate that we won. But also something even more precious. Our economy stabilised, the foundations of this country fixed, Tory rot cleared away. So brick by brick, we can build a new home, a better home, built to last, built with pride, but above all built together, a nation rebalanced so that it once again serves the interests of working people. And through the power unleashed by that process, a renewal of who we are, a country that gives equal voice to every person, a country that won't expect you to change who you are just to get on, a country that doesn't just work for you and your family, but one that recognises you, that sees you, and respects you as part of our story. A Britain that belongs to you. Because make no mistake, that is the Britain we are building. Change isn't a few lines on a graph moving in the right direction. Change isn't a good Labour policy or two delivered, while the broader settlement remains untouched. No, change must mean nothing less than national renewal. Not a return to the old ways, nor a new path entirely, but a rediscovery in the full glare of the future of who we are. The trouble is, conference, just as we found with the Labour Party 4 years ago, Britain is no longer sure of itself. Our story is uncertain. The hope beaten out of us. There's pride, of course there is. Pride in our communities, especially. And there's respect, too, all around the world. Trust me, nobody anywhere doubts that this is a great nation, a nation known for our creativity, our artistic skill, our scientific genius, and, of course, our pragmatism. Quality that, combined with the industry and pride of working people, have not just rewritten our own story, but also that of the world. We could do that again. In fact, we must. Technology, climate change, the aging population, the movement of people. This is a time when great forces demand a decisive government prepared to face the future. We can see that again in the Middle East today. So I call again for restraint and de-escalation at the border between Lebanon and Israel. Again, all parties to pull back from the brink. I call again for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages, the hostages, and a recommitment to the two-state solution. A recognised Palestinian state alongside a safe and secure Israel. And that's the message I will take to the UN General Assembly when I travel there later today. Alongside our steadfast support for Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression. And in this uncertain world, I also pay tribute to our armed forces for all they do to keep Britain safe. But conference, strength in this dangerous world depends on strength at home. And yet, look at our country. Look at our country. Do you see a Britain where people feel, with the certainty that they deserve, that the future will be better for their children? Because when I was growing up, that's what we believed. People of a completely ordinary working-class background like mine, we took it for granted. We built our lives around it. But that is not the country we inherited in July. That confidence, that certainty, it's brittle and fragile. And so we have to restore it. That is the mandate we won, the meaning of change. And it all comes back to that question. Can politics be a force for good in people's lives? There's no time to waste wondering why people think politics has failed. We have to show what it can do for their lives. Restore, after 14 years of chaos, faith in the values that have always guided this nation. The stability, moderation, the common sense, keeping a cool head, staying the course, facing the future, the defiance of ambition, the determination of service, and above all, our faith, no matter the challenge, in practical solutions that work, not the easy answers that may well move a crowd, but do not move a nation forward. No conference. We know that way lies ruin. We've seen it in our party, and we changed it. And for 14 years, against our country's best traditions, we've seen it in Britain. And now we must change that too. We must build a new Britain, built from that age-old spirit of creativity and enterprise, the pride and ambition of working people, that when matched by a government of service, a decisive government, a government prepared to use its powers for justice, opportunity, and equal respect, can deliver a Britain that belongs to you. A Britain that belongs to you because politics sees public service as a privilege, not privilege as an entitlement to public service. A Britain that belongs to you because government is mission-driven and serious, clear, measurable targets, progress displayed publicly, so every single person in this country can judge our performance on actions, not words. A Britain that belongs to you because we maintain our focus at all times on fixing those foundations for working people, those 5 national missions, providing the security and control they need, but also protecting us from the whims of Westminster, making sure that we don't get blown off course. And a Britain that belongs to you because we came together, and together we built it, because this has to be a partnership. We won't achieve our missions alone. I understand the power and responsibility of government, the way it can make or break a life. When you're chief prosecutor, when you look into the eyes of victims who've lost everything, parents whose daughter was raped and murdered, as I did with Penny and John, trust me, you learn about what government can and must do. And I also know from the campaigners who have inspired me, Pooja and Nikita Kanda, Figan Murray, people who fight tirelessly against murder and terrorism so no other family will suffer their awful pain. Nathaniel Dye, who fights for a better NHS so no other person will suffer his fatal late cancer diagnosis. The families and survivors of Grenfell Tower, whose dignity for 7 years held up a mirror to this nation and asked us, do we really give everyone an equal voice? They have all shown that the difference between service and government, true service, is that service must listen to people far beyond the walls of the state and empower them to make our country better. Because trust me, that is without question the quickest way to clear away the Tory rot and build that Britain that belongs to you. And so change begins, because there is another injustice hiding in plain sight in our streets, in every town and city in this country. People who were prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice for our nation, who put their lives on the line to protect all of us, but who will not have a safe place to sleep tonight. We cannot stand by and let this happen anymore. So today I can announce that this government will respect that service. We will repay those who served us and house all veterans in housing need. Homes will be there for heroes. Thank you. And because we've started the hard yards of planning reform, because we're facing up to decisions ignored for years, because we're introducing new planning passports that will turbocharge house building in our inner cities, we can make the very same promise to other people at risk of homelessness, young care leavers, victims of domestic abuse. They will have the security they deserve. They will have a roof over their head because Britain belongs to them. And another thing, conference, another promise kept. We said GB Energy, our publicly owned national champion, the vehicle that will drive forward our mission on clean energy, we said it belonged in Scotland. And it does. But the truth is, it could only really ever be based in one place in Scotland. So today I can confirm that the future of British energy will be powered, as it has been for decades, by the talent and skills of the working people in the Granite City, with GB Energy based in Aberdeen. This is how the work of change happens. A decisive mission-led government moving our country forward step by step, focused on a long-term plan. That first, we stabilise our economy. Second, we fix the foundation. And third, we build with pride and determination a Britain that belongs to you. But it will be hard. That's not rhetoric. It's reality. It's not just that financial black hole, the £22 billion of unfunded spending commitments, concealed from our country by the Tories. It's not just the societal black hole, our public services decimated, communities held together with little more than goodwill. It's also the political black hole, because the politics of national renewal, they're collective. They involve a shared struggle, a project that says to everyone, this will be tough in the short term, but in the long term, it's the right thing to do for our country, and we all benefit from that. To coin a phrase, we're all in it together. But that's just it, isn't it? People have heard it all before, and they listened. I ran a public service in the early days of austerity. People did everything asked of them to find a way forward. They did it in the pandemic as well. Saved the lives of people they will never meet, all while their government broke the very rules that they followed. And so people ask us now, as we seek patience in pursuit of national renewal, what will we get to show for it? I understand that. After all, what they're used to is a lie, an act, a charade, a performance. You may call it populism. Many people do. But I prefer to call it the politics of easy answers. Because at its core, that's what it is. A deliberate refusal to countenance tough decisions, because the political pain is just too much. Party first, country second. Take Rwanda, a policy they knew from the beginning would never work. was never supposed to work. £700 million of your money frittered away on something that was never a credible option, because politically it was an easier answer. And just look at the difference you can make if you bring the curtain down on the show. A 23% increase in returns of people who have no right to be here compared with last summer. But it's not just Rwanda. It was the same story on everything. Energy security, the housing crisis, telling people they're tough on crime without building enough prison places. 14 years of performance. 14 years of exploiting problems, not solving them, mining the pits of division, searching them for conflict, fixing your attention on those issues, not on growth, technology, climate change, public services, the ageing population, the cost of living crisis, or any of the challenges that this country desperately needed to face up to. Well, those challenges are still here, conference, and we are facing up to them. But do not forget what they did, and do not let them attempt to shift the blame, because the state of our country is on them. Why must we release prisoners early? Because the Tories served themselves. Why are our public services on their knees? Because the Tories served themselves. Why is crime routinely unpunished? Our rivers polluted, borders insecure, school roofs crumbling, child poverty rampant. Nothing seems to work. Our public finances broken. Because for 14 years, the Tories performed the politics of easy answers rather than use the power of government to serve our country. Yet still those wounds of trust must be healed. Still that question calls to us. What will we get to show for it? So let me answer that directly and address anyone nervous about the difficult road ahead. Because I know this country is exhausted by and with politics. I know that the cost of living crisis drew a veil over the joy and wonder in our lives, and that people want respite and relief, may even have voted Labour for that reason. So first, let me be clear. Our project has not and never will change. I changed the Labour Party to restore it to the service of working people, and that is exactly what we will do for Britain. But I will not do it with easy answers. I will not do it with false hope. Not now, not ever. That's how we got here in the first place. So I know, after everything you've been through, how hard it is to hear a politician ask for more. But deep down, I think you also know that our country does need a long-term plan and that we can't turn back. The state of our country is real. However, I would also say this. This is a government of service. And that means, whether we agree or not, I will always treat you with the respect of candour, not the distraction of bluster. And the truth is that if we take tough, long-term decisions now, if we stick to the driving purpose behind everything we do, higher economic growth, so living standards rise in every community, our NHS facing the future, waiting lists at your hospital down, safer streets in your community, stronger borders, more opportunities for your children, clean British energy powering your home, then that light at the end of this tunnel, that Britain that belongs to you, we get there much more quickly. And look, I understand that many of the decisions we must take will be unpopular. If they were popular, they'd be easy. But the cost of filling that black hole in our public finances, that will be shared fairly. We will get the welfare build out because we will tackle long-term sickness and support people back to work. We will make every penny work for you because we will root out waste and go over tax avoiders. There'll be no stone left unturned, no innovation ignored, no return to Tory austerity. We will rebuild our public service, protect working people, and do this in a Labour way, and that is a promise. And if you can't take that on faith, perhaps because you're concerned about the winter fuel allowance, then I get that. As I say, if this path were popular or easy, we'd have walked it already. But the risk of showing to the world, as the Tories did, that this country does not fund its policies properly, that is a risk we can never take again. Stabilising our economy is the first step of this long-term plan. The only way we keep prices down, cut NHS waiting lists, and secure the triple lock so that every pensioner in this country, every pensioner, will be better off with Labour. But more broadly, I also say this, that as we take on those massive challenges the Tories ignored, the time is long overdue for politicians to level with you about the trade-offs this country faces. Because if the last few years have shown us anything, it's that if you bury your head because things are difficult, your country goes backwards. So if we want justice to be served, some communities must live close to new prisons. If we want to maintain support for the welfare state, then we will legislate to stop benefit fraud, do everything we can to tackle worklessness. If we want cheaper electricity, we need new pylons overground. Otherwise, the burden on taxpayers is too much. If we want home ownership to be a credible aspiration for our children, then every community has a duty to contribute to that purpose. If we want to tackle illegal migration seriously, we can't pretend that there's a magical process that allows you to return people here unlawfully without accepting that process will also grant some people asylum. And if we're serious about levelling up, then we must be proud to be the party of wealth creation, unashamed to partner with the private sector, and perhaps most importantly of all, that just because we all want low tax and good public services, that does not mean that the iron law of properly funding policies can be ignored. Because it can't. We've seen the damage that that does, and I will not let that happen again. I will not let Tory economic recklessness hold back the working people of this country. And let me tell you something else I won't let happen. I will never let a minority of violent, racist thugs terrorise our communities. Thank you. Look, I have always accepted that concerns about immigration are legitimate. It is, as point of fact, the policy of this government to reduce both net migration and our economic dependency upon it. I have never thought we should be relaxed about some sectors importing labour, when there are millions of young people, ambitious and highly talented, who are desperate to work and contribute to their community. And trust me, there are plenty of examples of apprenticeship starts going down at the very same time that visa application for the same skills are going up. So we will get tough on this. But at the same time, we'll also get our skills system right. We've got to give businesses more flexibility to adapt to real training needs, and also unlock the pride, the ambition, the pull of the badge on the shirt that young people feel when building a future not just for themselves, but for their community. So we will introduce new foundation apprenticeships, rebalance funding in our training system back to young people, align that with what businesses really need. The first step to a youth guarantee that will eradicate inactivity and unemployment for our young people once and for all. But conference, whatever anyone thinks about immigration, I will never accept the argument, made not just by the usual suspects, but by people who should have known better, who said that millions of people concerned about immigration are one and the same thing as the people who smashed up businesses, who targeted mosques, attempted to burn refugees, scrawled racist graffiti over walls, Nazi salutes at the cenotaph, attacked NHS nurses, and told people with different coloured skin, people who contribute here, people who grew up here, that they should go home. No. No. No conference. No conference. People concerned about immigration were not doing that because they understand that this country, this democratic country, is built on the rule of law, the ballot box, the common understanding that we debate our differences, we do not settle them with violent thuggery, and racism is vile. And conference. So to those who equivocate about this, I simply say the country sees you and it rejects you. And to those who say that the only way to love your country is to hate your neighbour because they look different, I say not only do we reject you, we know that you will never win, because the British values we stand for, not just the rule of law, but a love for this country and our neighbours, the respect for difference under the same flag, that is stronger than bricks, and you know it. It's what you cannot stand about our country, our reasonable, tolerant country, but it's absolutely who we are. No conference. The debate is not about the worth of migrants. That is toxic, and we must move beyond it. It's about control of migration. It's always been about control. That is what people have voted for time and again. And look, they weren't just ignored after Brexit. The Tories gave them the exact opposite. An immigration system deliberately reformed to reduce control. Because in the end, they are the party of the uncontrolled market. Now, don't get me wrong. Markets are dynamic. Competition is a vital life force in our economy. This is a Labour Party proud to say that. We work hand in hand with business. But markets don't give you control. That's almost literally their point. So if you want a country with more control, if you want the great forces that affect your community to be better managed, whether that's migration, climate change, law and order, or security at work, then that does mean more decisive government. And that is a Labour government. Taking back control is a Labour argument. It's why I say we're rebalancing our country to serve working people, because this is a question of balance. We can't afford any more polluted rivers. We can't afford any more COVID contracts. We can't afford any more Grenfell Towers. We have to become serious and mission-led, have to put respect and service deep in the bones of our institutions. That's not a debate about investment or reform. It's always been both. But again, I have to warn you, working people do want a more decisive government. They do want us to rebuild our public services. And they do want that to lead to more control in their lives. But their pockets are not deep. Not at all. So we have to be a great reforming government. Our NHS reformed, so patients have more control over their health. Our energy system reformed, so our country has more control over its security. Police and justice reformed, so communities have more control of their street. Education reformed, so children have more control of their future. And our economy reformed, with the unique force that is economic growth, giving every community the breathing space, the calm, the control, to focus on the little things they love in life, not the anxiety and insecurity we have now. Because we do need joy. We do need that in our lives. And one place that has always done that for me, Conference, I told you about it last year. It's the Lake District. A place that my mum loved, not just because what it meant to her, her determination to show that she could walk in a place like that, but because of the beauty everywhere. And last year, I took my family to the old cottage where we used to stay as children in the Lake District. We walked up to the cottage, stood outside. It must have looked a little odd. And the couple who live there now, they came out. They were lovely. And when we told them why we were there, they said, well, come inside. Go upstairs, take a walk down memory lane. So we did. Came back outside. We were chatting. And then the woman stopped suddenly and said, someone's nicking your car. And I said, no, that's the police moving the car. And that really confused her. Anyway, at this point, her husband comes in and he says, you haven't clocked, have you? He's the leader of the opposition, a politician. And she stopped, smiled, laughed, and said politely, if I'd known you were a politician, I'd have pushed you down the stairs when I had the chance. The beauty of the Lake District and the heart of the British people in a nutshell. But seriously, when you're walking around in a place like the Langdale Valley, when you can see the grass there every bit as green as it was 14 years ago, it's a reminder and an inspiration that yes, things change, and some things need to change, but some things do not. And the joy and wonder of our nation, the spirit of its people, the cleaners, the drivers, small business owners, teachers, teaching assistants, the people who came out and cleaned the streets, the brickies who rebuilt the broken walls in Southport, the backbone of this country, they are just as resilient as they were 14 years ago. And no matter what loudmouths say on social media, their values are the same. So we will turn our collar up and face the storm. We will rise above the challenges that we've inherited. Because this is a country with fairness in the water, that believes in justice, and that wants working people to be respected. And also for opportunities to be there for your children. Because conference, one of the other things that gave me great joy as a kid, as well as the football, obviously, was the flute. Don't think you're expecting that, were you? But seriously, the flute gave me so many opportunities. My first ever trip abroad was to Malta with the Croydon Youth Philharmonic Orchestra. And I'm sure everyone here will know the feeling of being drawn in by music, getting lost in something bigger than yourself, or being moved by a book, a painting, a play. Even now, I turn to Beethoven or Brahms in those moments when, how to put it, the reviews aren't so good. I've got Shostakovich lined up for tomorrow. But these early encounters with art and culture, they change us forever. And we are brilliant at them in this country, brilliant. But those opportunities don't go to every child, do they? My brother, who had difficulties learning, he didn't get those opportunities. Every time I achieved something in my life, my dad used to say to me, "Your brother has achieved just as much as you, Keir." And he was right. I still believe that. But this is what we do in this country, isn't it? We elevate the stories of the individuals who go to the Guildhall School of Music, the Prime Minister from a pebble-dash semi, the working class few who do break through the class ceiling. I don't blame anyone for that. I am guilty of it. It gives hope to people. It's important to tell those stories. But it's not everyone, is it? And we must remember everyone, conference, because everyone deserves the chance to be touched by art. Everyone deserves access to moments that light up their lives. And every child deserves the chance to study the creative subjects that widen their horizons, provide skills employers do value, and prepares them for the future, the jobs and the world that they will inherit. But more than that, every child, every person deserves to be respected for the contribution they make. My sister was a... I think this guy's obviously got a pass from the 2019 conference. We changed the party. While he's been protesting, we've been changing the party. That's why we've got a Labour government. The conference. The point I was making is this: every child, every person deserves to be respected for the contribution they make. My sister was a care worker in the pandemic. She is still a care worker. Work that surely by now we know is so important for the future of this country. So wouldn't it be great, So, conference, wouldn't it be great if this was always and also a country where, because of that contribution, that vital, life-affirming work, she could walk into any room and instantly command the same respect as the Prime Minister? Because those are my values, that is what I believe, and those are the values of the Britain that we will build. What will people get to show for it? They will get a country with its future back, renewed by respect and service, rebalanced towards the interests of working people, confident in its values and story, because together we took action. Millions who feel better off, without just being told they're better off by politicians, going to the supermarket without a calculator, because the nation's numbers now add up. More money in their pocket to do the things they love. More faith in their public services, because once again, Labour rebuilt them. An NHS facing the future. More security and dignity at work. Town centres thriving. Streets safe. Borders controlled at last. Clean energy harnessed for national renewal. New homes, new towns, new hospitals, roads and schools. A new future for our children. That is what people will get, and mark my words, we will deliver it. People said we couldn't change the party, but we did. People said we wouldn't win across Britain, but we did. People say we can't deliver national renewal, but we can and we will. We will stabilise our economy, clear out the Tory rot, fix the foundation and deliver the mandate of change. A Britain built to last, built with respect, built with pride, because together we have shown that Britain belongs to you. Thank you, conference. Thank you. Thank you, conference. Thank you. Thank you, conference.
Sir Keir Starmer ending his first speech to Labour Party conference as Prime Minister. They're all on their feet. They've been on their feet for the last few minutes. This was a serious and sober speech by Sir Keir Starmer. There are no sunny uplands yet. He's asking for time and patience, being embraced there by his wife Victoria on the stage. Rapturous reception here in the conference hall, as you would accept. But he's asking for time, a lot of time, 2 terms, really. It all sounded very much like 10 years that he's been talking about for this national renewal. Patience to rebuild a country that he says has been ruined. He wants to clear out the Tory rot. The question remains as to whether Sir Keir Starmer and Labour will be rewarded for what they would say is political honesty about the state of the country. He made a promise quite early on in his speech to all those who served their country, that all veterans will be housed and victims of domestic violence. It was one of a number of points throughout the speech that brought conference to its feet. But there are hard yards ahead. He did say we've got to have joy in our lives towards the end of his speech, and he told a funny story from a holiday up in the Lake District. But no one can get away from the fact that he sees this job of service, of commitment, as he said, he used a phrase actually that was coined initially by a Conservative Chancellor, a former Conservative Chancellor, George Osborne, that we're all in it together. He spoke for almost an hour. We can hear the cheering behind us here as we're sitting on set with our guests. Let me introduce Vicky Young, the BBC's Deputy Political Editor. What did you make of it, Vicky?
It was interesting because the reception towards the end there was getting much more rapturous because at the beginning it was, it was pretty quiet, subdued in there, and that's because his message was incredibly serious. I mean, it was a sort of state of the nation type, talking about the problems that the country has, as you say, really asking for a long time to fix it, but also painting himself really as Mr. Reliable, talking about stability, having a cool head, about moderation, almost saying, look, I'm not going to get you all cheering from the rafters. I'm here to do a job, and it's going to be a tough job. And I think, like the example there, hardly any policy announcements in it at all.
No.
The one there about former veterans getting housing, but actually no detail about how that's going to happen. I mean, there's incredible demand for social housing, if that's what he's talking about. Well, how is he going to get there? Well, we still don't quite know yet. He's almost saying, look, and if you think about when he became leader, no one thought that he would get that party into power in one term, if you like. He did do that, and I think he's saying, you've almost got to trust me that I managed to turn around my party. I wasn't afraid to do very difficult things, and I will do that again. And so the message there was saying, of course, some things that they really wanted to hear, but talking about, look, we need wealth creation, we need partnership with the private sector. That might not be something all of them want to hear in there, especially when it comes to the NHS, for example. So, look, the difficult decisions are still to come, I would say. He's there talking about, the difficulties, and I still think one of the most sort of powerful bits was about the Conservative legacy. That seemed to be the bit where he almost spoke in most comfortably.
Yeah, what did you make of that? That he really did want to entrench what he called a number of times Conservative rot. I mean, he had this part of the speech. He said it's been 14 years of performance, 14 years of exploiting problems, not solving them, mining the pits of division, excavating them for conflict, fixing your attention on those issues, and that he is going to be different. But it sounded like the solution is going to be quite managerial. It's going to be quite bureaucratic. Now, that may be the right way to do it. But is that going to excite, it may excite people here, but is it going to excite people out in the country and take them with him?
You're right. He spent a lot of time criticising people. Basically, there were a lot of criticisms of the rioters, a really long section on that. There's a lot of criticism of the Tories, and they really do want to talk about that inheritance because they believe that's very fair to talk about. But yeah, as you say, he explicitly said, markets don't give you control, better management does. And that is the kind of criticism we have heard of Keir Starmer over the years, which is that his offer to people is, I will be quite similar to the Conservatives, but I will just be a better manager. I'm better at doing these things, rather than a complete shift in perspective.
Yeah,
politics.
I mean, do you agree with that? That it did feel, we will manage immigration, we will manage it better.
Yeah.
There was a feeling, he wanted to say we need immigration, but he said the Conservatives let it go out of control. But there wasn't really a firm offer of what they're going to do.
No, and I think that was the theme of them in opposition, where they would point at things and say, this is a mess, we would do it better, not necessarily this is how we do it differently. And to me it felt like a bit of a lecture, and I mean that in both senses of the word, in the sense that he was saying, we're not this kind of government, we're not that kind of government, people who think we're this are wrong. So he was sort of lecturing people, but he was also being always quite academic, in that there wasn't a policy offer in that speech. I was expecting, and I think John Ashworth, who was speaking to us earlier, had suggested there was going to be some kind of plan on worklessness, on welfare reform. We got something on apprenticeships, a sentence on redirecting resources so that there'd be foundational apprenticeships. But I was expecting something really interesting and meaty on welfare reform. And I have to say, as somebody who likes writing about policy, would like to write about that rather than who hates who in Downing Street, it was a little bit thin.
Right, well, there is also that slightly awkward juxtaposition of talking about competence, of talking about managing the country better, and yet the last few weeks and while we've been here at conference have been filled with those stories of perhaps not having enough grip on what's been going on in his own household.
Well, yeah, and talking about trust in politics and people being fed up with politics. They've had enough of it. And so I think that's why the frustration from people around here about what's happened in the last few weeks, is so palpable, because it's like they're trying to say we're very different from the last government, and there's little bits of it that you might say, well, maybe they're not. So that has been very frustrating for people, and I think to your point, there are cabinet ministers saying, well, we knew we didn't have any announcements because we know our department isn't making announcements here, but we're really surprised that the centre, number 10, haven't come up with stuff that would have filled a bit of the void, so people weren't talking about some rivalries in number 10. But I think there is a more significant point to that if number 10 isn't functioning smoothly, that is a major problem. I mean, if that's the case, and it's too early to say that at the moment, it could just be teething problems, can they sort it out? But that is a problem for a new government that has got such a lot that it wants to do. That really has to work well, those
And we're going to put
relationships.
some of this, or much of this, to the Deputy Prime Minister and Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, Angela Rayner, as soon as she comes and joins us on the set. But let's try and get a flavour of that sort of rapturous feeling inside the hall. Harry Farley, my colleague, is talking to delegates.
Yes, thanks, Jo. I've got 4 delegates with me. We've just stood outside the entrance hall as people pour out. So we've got Mason, James, Sue and Connor. Let's start with you, Mason. What did you make of that?
I thought it was his best conference speech he's ever done. I thought it was strong, but I also thought he was frank about what the state the country's in at the moment.
James, your thoughts?
It was a really positive speech, so I was hoping for a lot of optimism. Obviously realism of where the country is now, and we got that. It was a really optimistic and very uplifting speech.
Did you feel it did address that desire for hope, I suppose? There was a lot of talk about the challenges the country's faced. It felt like he was asking for 10 years rather than 5. Did you feel it gave you enough hope?
Yes, I think so. He's asking people to come along the journey with us. It's not going to be an easy road, but he's showing that we've got a plan and that we've got light at the end of the tunnel. The country's in a bit of a mess at the moment, and we've inherited a bit of a mess from the Conservatives, but we've got a clear plan of where things are going, and we've got something that we can be proud of by the end of that.
So what stood out to you?
Stood out for me, I think, was the optimism, but also the sense of service, the realisation that we cannot have politicians who serve themselves, but politicians who actually serve the nation. And it's really important that people feel that they're on a journey with us and that they can see that there is light at the end of the tunnel and the light is getting brighter.
It felt like he was trying to paint a picture of the narrative of how he saw Britain and the narrative that he wants to take Britain on. Did you think he did enough to, I suppose, overcome some of the concerns around things like cutting the winter fuel allowance that we've seen over the last few weeks from unions, among others?
Yeah, I understand that. There is going to be, you're never going to get through without actually upsetting somebody. What we need to do, though, is to actually be pragmatic and to be clear and to ensure that the level of... I love the bit that he spoke about culture. I love the bit that he spoke about the arts, because all the time we are getting the right-wing people telling us we are not English, we are not British, because we are inclusive and we bring people in. Arts are for everyone, and I felt this was really important as a way of actually providing hope for people and actually have something to aspire to.
Lots of nodding from James and Connor, James and Mason, apologies. Connor, what did you make of that? What stood out to you?
To be honest, the thing that stood out to me the most actually was when he talked about family and the fact that he emphasised that obviously he is the Prime Minister now, but obviously how much he appreciated the sister who was a social care worker, and the fact that obviously at the end of the day he is only one man as the Prime Minister, but for us to fix the entire country that we're in right now, it's obviously on the backs of everyone in the country, even everyone who's standing midway here, supports and acknowledges that we need to do better and we need to do things that will push the country in a positive light. And the fact that obviously he said, wouldn't it be nice if, a train or bus driver walked into the room and commanded the same type of, respect as the Prime Minister. And obviously, the only way for Great Britain to be great again is by the people of Great Britain to feel great about themselves and understand that everyone together is part of this.
Connor, thank you very much. That's Connor, Sue, James and Mason. Some thoughts from the delegates just leaving the conference hall. A rapturous reception, but I suppose some of the things that stood out to some of them at least.
Harry Farley, thank you very much. Obviously inspired many of the people inside the hall. We've been joined here on the set of Politics Live by Gary Smith from the GMB Union, General Secretary, and Sienna Rogers is still with us from House Magazine, and Isabel Hardman from The Spectator. First of all, Gary, your reaction to the speech?
I thought it was determined. I thought it was positive, realistic but positive. I was hugely moved by the contribution about care workers. Our members in care would have liked to hear that. Our members in care do a critical job. They went through the pandemic with plastic bags for PPE. And for him to talk about the respect of workers like those in care, it really touched me. And on apprenticeships. You know, I went through an apprenticeship as a young person myself, the hope and opportunity that brings, building back working class communities and giving people skilled employment. I thought it was a really positive speech, his best so far, and there was a lot to take away from that.
Was there enough for you about job creation, about jobs going forward, particularly when this government is keen to talk about the green transition?
I think there's been a lot of talk about employment, an industrial plan. We've been talking about that.
We've got this industrial strategy coming out next month.
Coming forward. He talked about Great British Energy being put in Aberdeen, which I think is positive as well. I genuinely think Keir Starmer and this government gets working class people and communities and the need to bring back better quality jobs with better opportunities and hope to our people across the country.
Sienna, that sort of personal, the sort of cultural part of the speech at the end, it obviously touched the delegates there that Harry was talking to. What did you make of that bit of the speech?
Frankly, I would have just cut the first half of the speech.
Oh, really?
Because I just thought it was a little bit dull. But it really got going once Keir Starmer talked about his love of culture. He made it very, very personal. He gave that really funny anecdote about his family visiting that home and kind of tapped into how people feel very cynical about politicians. It was funny. It was real. He was much more natural. And then talking about how, you know, he used to play the flute and it changed his life and that everyone needs access to the arts. That was the bit of the speech that I thought was really, really strong. And I wish most of the speech had been spent on, you know, the apprenticeships, that kind of policy, and kind of spelling that out a little bit more, and then the culture stuff. I think that would have been much stronger.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think he had, you know, government of service as his theme. And as you say, towards the end, he started to be much more moving on care workers who he used as an example of people who serve our country. He'd already done that with veterans, but I think he could have expanded the care worker section. I mean, I know there's a deal coming up for care workers' pay in the next few weeks. Maybe they just couldn't get it over the line, but wouldn't it have been so much better to be able to announce a care workers pay package during that conference speech to say this is who we stand for? Given you've had a junior doctor's pay rise, you've cut the winter fuel payment, actually the people who kept us going and kept a lot of our, you know, relatives safe during the pandemic are still being paid peanuts.
The difference is with junior doctors and many other workers is they've got collective bargaining through their unions. We're going to build that home framework and structure through the new deal for working people. So you see this in the context of the whole conference. We are talking about something transformational with an industrial plan for this country. Our communities have been hollowed out by free market economics. We're bringing back workers' rights. We've got an industrial plan. There's so much to be positive about leaving this conference, and I thought his speech was excellent today.
Right, well, you brought up workers' rights. We've talked briefly about housing. It's a good time to introduce Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister and also Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government. Welcome to you. We've been talking about the reaction to the speech. And just to get your reaction, particularly since Sienna Rogers here, City, she loved the cultural part. She loved the more personal bit. Could we have heard a bit more of that, a little bit more across the speech about those stories and anecdotes?
I think it was a mixture of Keir talking about the seriousness of fixing the foundations, but the reason behind why he does it. And that was fantastic for me, because I've been saying this for years about Keir as an individual, and now you're seeing him come into his own as a Prime Minister, of seriousness about, look, I'm not going to give you gimmicks. I'm going to take you on the journey of where I can see us going, like he did with the Labour Party when people said he couldn't do it. And he's saying, stick with this, and here's my motivation. You could see the emotion in him when he said, this is the motivation, this is the Britain that I'm proud of, this is what we're building together. And he said building a lot, which I was very pleased about.
Yes, I'm sure you were. You were very much at the centre and the forefront, clearly, of his mind in terms of your being Secretary of State for Housing. On that, at the very beginning, or very close to the beginning of the speech, he said that we are going to house all veterans, those who've served our country, and victims of domestic violence. That's a commitment.
And care leavers.
And care leavers. And that is a firm commitment. When are you going to be able to deliver that?
Well, we've already been speaking to local authorities about their priorities and also about how we can, one of the main barriers for care leavers, people fleeing domestic violence and veterans is around local connection tests. So we're going to remove that local connection test so that people can get the houses they need. And of course, fixing the supply problem is also part of the challenge that we face.
Well, on that supply problem, why not just get rid of right to buy?
Well, we think that right to buy should be there, but not under the 2012 changes, because what we see now is that the taxpayers are funding social housing, but we can't replace them because of the discount is too great.
Sure.
So we
but that would help you deliver on those social housing.
So we've started a consultation that means that for every social home that's sold, we can replace them. And I don't mean one for like. Actually, we need to have a real generational boost to social and council housing in this country. I started off by enabling flexibilities with the Affordable Homes programme so that we pulled in the stalled sites that were stalled under the previous government. I've set new mandatory housing targets, and I've been very forthright in saying we will fix the foundations so we can get the houses we need.
Right. In terms of those commitments, though, can you give a timeline? Everything that Keir Starmer was talking about, brick by brick, the sort of hard yards, it feels like it's going to take even more than 5 years. A first term, he obviously would like, you would like a second term. Is that how long people are going to have to wait for these sorts of changes and promises?
No, there has to be movement before then. And you'll have seen, like I say, there were sites that are available, that are ready to build thousands of homes that were stalled in the system that we're already unlocking. So we've seen as well the announcement today in terms of housing supply went down again because of the Tories. I've taken on the blockers, I'm pushing forward, and we will build the houses that we need. You can't build them overnight, of course not.
No.
Steve Rotherham's proved you can knock them up in a couple of days here in Liverpool, and we're looking at how we can deliver the houses we need for the future.
Can you guarantee they're not going to be temporary homes? So for victims of domestic violence, they often end up, and there was a Sunday Times investigation this weekend, people in office blocks for sort of 5 years, really unsuitable.
That is a point, and we've got 150,000 children families living in temporary accommodation. That's having a knock-on effect on local authority budgets as well, and they're seeing real pressures. So we've got to fix the supply problem. That's why I want to see more social and council housing. I'm not going to say what's in the spending review, but how we can unlock that potential to tackle some of these issues, because actually we can't have people in temporary accommodation. It affects every element of your life.
Can I talk more broadly about, I mean, Isabel was saying that Keir Starmer spoke about service to the country. He also talked about a shared struggle in order to get to that national renewal, and that we would need tough decisions in the short term. But so far, for many people here, never mind outside the conference, the biggest decision that you've taken so far is to cut winter fuel payments for millions of pensioners. How is that a shared struggle?
Well, we also made a very big commitment and decision to protect the triple lock as well. And it wasn't easy, the choice, but what we said is that we needed to means test the winter fuel. And many people accept that the richest pensioners don't need the winter fuel.
But these aren't just the richest pensioners.
I'm going to come on to that. I understand that. There's those that on the breadline that will be protected, and there's over 800,000 who are entitled to pension credit that wasn't having it under the Tories. These are some of our poorest pensioners.
But how does that fit with a shared struggle? Because so far, the only people who are going to be struggling, I mean, it may change at the end of October. It sounds like there are tougher decisions coming down the line that will affect other people too. But so far, do you accept that that shared struggle looks as if it's on the shoulders of pensioners and not just the wealthiest?
I don't accept it's just on them, because if you look at the families that are struggling in the temporary accommodation, if you look at people in work who are in insecure work at the moment, if you look at the challenges that pensioners face, which is why we protected the triple lock, you know, we were pushed about the 2-child limit. We were not able to do that yet. So there is tough choices, but what we're saying is fixing the foundations will make sure people have got more money in their pockets through making sure that work pay. Pensioners will be protected because we won't run loose with the economy, where we saw interest rates going up to nearly 11% under the Conservatives. So the foundational fixes we're making now will make people better off.
You could make and could have made different decisions. There are many people here, Gary may well be one of them, who'd like you to introduce a wealth tax, for example. There have been calls from people on this set during conference, put in a wealth tax, make the wealthiest pay more. Why haven't you done that?
Rachel set out that we want, and I think the Prime Minister set out today as well, we want to see wealth creators. We've got the highest tax burden for a generation of 70 years on people. So we're saying we need to protect the economy, protect people, but we want to see that investment into our economy. Rachel talked about the National Wealth Fund. We've got the industrial strategy from Johnny. We're doing make work pay so workers get more money in their pockets.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things we're doing to restructure the economy to get growth and pay for our public services.
And do you accept the excitement that we can hear in your voice as you're sitting here telling us, and we heard it from Keir Starmer, long-term things that have been established, not so much on the retail side, that it hasn't gained the sort of traction that you might have liked because of a sense of disunity at the top, because of divisions at the heart of government at number 10. Do you regret that?
Well, I don't recognise that characterisation of number 10, actually. And some of the things we did in opposition, for example, are really starting to bear fruit now. And that was the work of Sue Gray in particular.
Yeah.
And that was us working together. So Johnny's industrial strategy as the business secretary is our common endeavour. Yeah. The make work pay is a common endeavour. Sure. The transport connectivity, the infrastructure we need if we're going to build the houses. We have to work together as a cabinet, and we've really forged those links that I think are going to show that we can really deliver, because often government's in silos. And we were warned of that, and therefore we've pulled together as a cabinet to make sure that we can break down some of the challenges that people will say, you're building the houses, but why are you not building the infrastructure, the hospitals, the GP surgeries? So we're working together to make sure we fulfil that.
But there has been a sense of it being overshadowed. Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, was here an hour or so going, whatever Keir Starmer does, he mustn't get rid of his Chief of Staff. She is too valuable. He should get rid of the people briefing against her. Do you agree?
Well, I don't enjoy any briefings. I've had my fair share of briefings ever since
Yes.
I've been elected as deputy leader. Anyone would think me and Keir never chat. You know, I take them with a pinch of salt, because actually you'll have seen even through the years of me and Keir working together, we're delivering for the British people. What I recognise in the cabinet and across number 10 is people actually working hard to say, we promise the British people change.
All right.
That's what we've got to be focused on.
Well, you've talked about some of the briefing against you. Let's just ask you about a personal photographer. There have been stories, the Daily Mail has claimed that you're the first Deputy Prime Minister to have a personal photographer. The government has disputed it. Can you clear it up?
Well, I didn't appoint them. It's a photographer.
Oh, but there is one.
Each department has photographers. Government has photographers. They go out with ministers and whatever else to promote the work. But I haven't appointed any photographer. And according to my department, that person is a civil service appointment that they've made, and that actually was an internal appointment. So I haven't gone out and made a political appointment to get myself as photographer. That's just not true.
All right. Gary, just before we go, because we've only got a minute or so left, what would you like the next thing for Keir Starmer to tackle?
Look, the big thing for us is about rebuilding this country. I go round, I see towns that are broken, our people beaten. We need to create better quality jobs, union jobs, better paid jobs. That's what's going to lift up our communities. The industrial strategy, the New Deal for working people. We have a real moment and a real chance for renewal in this country, and we desperately need it.
It's all we have time for. Thank you very much. It's all gone so quickly, and we have a great crowd gathered round us for Angela Rayner, of course, the Deputy Prime Minister. We will be back tomorrow with more Politics Live. Thank you to my guests for keeping me company throughout the conference speech too. We'll be back here at 12:15 on BBC Two and the iPlayer. Please join me. Bye-bye.